Chapter 1, Part 2 of Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds by Bernard Lebovier de Fontenelle, translated by William Gardner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Michelle Kilpatrick. "Methinks," says the Countess, "your philosophy is a kind of outcry, where he that offers to do the work cheapest carries it from all the rest." "This," says I, "is very true. Nature is a great huswife. She always makes use of what costs least, let the difference be never so inconsiderable. And yet this frugality is accompanied with an extraordinary magnificence, which shines through all her works. That is, she is magnificent in the design, but frugal in the execution. And what can be more praiseworthy than a great design accomplished with a little expense? But in our ideas we turn things topsy-turvy. We place our thrift in the design, and are at 10 times more charge in workmanship than it requires, which is very ridiculous. Imitate nature, then," says she, "in your system, and give me as little trouble as you can to comprehend you." "Madam," says I, "fear it not. We've done with our impertinences. Imagine, then, a German called Copernicus confounding everything, tearing in pieces the beloved circles of antiquity, and shattering their crystal heavens like so many glass windows. Seized with the noble rage of astronomy, he snatches up the earth from the centre of the universe, sends her packing, and places the sun in the centre, to which it did more justly belong. The planets no longer turn round the earth, nor enclose it in the circles they describe. If they give us light, it is but by chance, and as they meet us in their way. All now goes round the sun, even the earth herself, and Copernicus, to punish the earth for her former laziness, makes her contribute all he can to the motion of the planets and heavens. And now, stripped of all the heavenly equipage with which she was so gloriously attended, she has nothing left her but the moon, which still turns round about her." "Fair and softly," says the Countess. "I fancy you yourself are seized with the noble fury of astronomy. A little less rapture, and I shall understand you better. The sun, you say, is in the centre of the universe, and is immovable." "Mercury," says I, "follows next. He turns round the sun, so that the sun is in the centre of the circle wherein Mercury moves. Above Mercury is Venus, who turns all around the sun. After comes the earth, which, being placed higher than Mercury and Venus, makes a greater circle round the sun than either of them. At last comes Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, in the same order I name 'em, so that Saturn has the greatest circle round the sun, which is the reason he is a longer time in making his revolution than any of the other planets." "You have forgot the moon," says the Countess. "We shall quickly find her again," says I. "The moon turns round the earth and does not leave her, but as the earth advances in the circle which she describes about the sun, and if the moon turns round the sun, it is because she won't quit the earth." "I understand you," says she, "and I love the moon for staying with us when all the other planets abandon us." "Nay, I fear your German would have willingly taken her away too, if he could, for in all his proceedings I find he had a great spite to the earth." "'Twas well done of him," says I, "to abate the vanity of mankind, who had taken up the best place in the universe, and it pleases me to see the earth in the crowds of the planets." "Sure," says she, "you don't think their vanity extends itself so far as astronomy." "Do you believe you have humbled me in telling me the earth goes round the sun? For my part, I don't think myself the worse for it." "I confess, madam," says I, "it is my belief that a fair lady would be much more concerned for her place at a ball than for her rank in the universe. And the precedence of 2 planets will not make half such a noise in the world as that of 2 ambassadors. However, the same inclination which reigns at a ceremony governs in a system, and if you love the uppermost place in the one, the philosopher desires the centre in the other. He flatters himself that all things were made for him, and insensibly believes a matter of pure speculation to be a point of interest." "This is a calumny," says she, "you have invented against mankind. Why did they receive this system, if it was so erroneous?" "I know not," says I, "but I am sure Copernicus himself distrusted the success of his opinion. 'Twas a long time before he would venture to publish it, nor had he done it then without the importunity of his friends. But do you know what became of him? The very day they brought him the first printed sheet of his book, he died, foreseeing that he should never be able to clear all the contradictions, and therefore very wisely slipped out of the way. I would be just to all the world, says the Countess, but 'tis hard to fancy we move, and yet see we do not change our place. We find ourselves in the morning where we lay down at night. Perhaps you'll tell me the whole earth moves. Yes, certainly, says I. 'Tis the same case as if you fell asleep in a boat upon the river. When you wake, you find yourself in the same place and the same situation in respect to all the parts of the boat. 'Tis true, replied she, but here's a great difference. When I wake, I find another shore, and that shows me my boat has changed its place. But 'tis not the same with the earth. I find all things as I left 'em. No, no, says I, there's another shore too. You know that beyond the circles of the planets are fixed stars. There's our shore. I am upon the earth, and the earth makes a great circle round the sun. I look for the center of the circle and see the sun there. Then I direct my sight beyond the sun in a right line, and should certainly discover the fixed stars which answer to the sun, but that the light of the sun effaces them. But at night I easily perceive the stars that corresponded with him in the day, which is exactly the same thing. If the earth did not change its place in the circle where it is, I should see the sun always against the same fixed stars. But when the earth changes its place, the sun must answer to other stars. And there again is your shore, which is always changing. And seeing the earth makes her circle in a year, I see the sun likewise in the space of a year answer successively to the whole circle of the fixed stars, which circle is called the zodiac. I'll draw you the figure of it, if you please, on the sand. 'Tis no matter, says she, I can do well enough without it. Besides, it will give an air of learning to my park which I would not have in it. For I've heard of a certain philosopher, who being shipwrecked and cast upon an unknown island, seeing several mathematical figures traced on the seashore, cried out to those who followed him, Courage, courage, my companions, the isle is inhabited, behold the footsteps of men. But you may spare your figures, such footsteps are not decent here. I confess, madam, says I, the footsteps of lovers would better become this place. That is, your name in cipher cut on the trees by your adorers. Tell me not, says she, of lovers and adorers. I am for my beloved sun and planets. But how comes it to pass that the sun, as to the fixed stars, completes his course but in a year, and yet goes over our heads every day? Did you never, replied I, observe a bull on the green? It runs towards the block, and at the same time turns very often round itself, so that the parts which were above are below, and those which were below are above. Just so it is with the earth. At the same time that she advances on the circle, which in a year's space she makes round the sun, in 24 hours she turns round herself, so that in 24 hours every part of the earth loses the sun, and recovers him again, and as it turns towards the sun it seems to rise, and as it turns from him it seems to fall. 'Tis very pleasant, says she, that the earth must take all upon herself, and the sun do nothing. And when the moon, the other planets, and the fixed stars seem to go over our heads every 24 hours, you'll say that too is only fancy. Pure fancy, says I, which proceeds from the same cause, for the planets complete their courses round the sun at unequal times, according to their unequal distances, and that which today we see answer to a certain point in the zodiac, or circle of the fixed stars, tomorrow will answer to another point, because it is advanced on its own circle, as well as we are advanced upon ours. We move, and the planets move too, but with more or less rapidity than we. This puts us in different points of sight in respect to them, and makes us think their courses irregular. But there is no occasion of discoursing to you on that head. 'Tis sufficient to inform you that what seems irregular in the planets proceeds only from our motion, when in truth they are all very regular. I will suppose them so, says the Countess, but I would not have their regularity put the earth to so great trouble. Methinks you exact too much activity from so ponderous a mass. But, says I, had you rather that the sun and all the stars, which are vast great bodies, should in 24 hours make a prodigious tour round the earth, and that the fixed stars, which are in a circle of infinite extent whose movement is always extreme, should run in a day 300 millions of leagues, and go farther than from hence to China in the time that you could say, away quick to China, as they needs must if the earth did not turn round itself every 24 hours. To say the truth, 'tis much more reasonable to think that she should make the tour, which at most is not above 9,000 leagues. You perceive plainly that to set 9,000 leagues against 300 millions is no trifling difference. Oh, says she, the sun and the stars are all fire, their motion is not very difficult, but the earth, I fancy, is a little unwieldy. That, replied I, signifies nothing. For what think you of a first-rate ship which carries 150 guns and above 3,000 men, besides her provisions and other furniture? One puff of wind, you see, sets it a-sailing, because the water is liquid, and being easily separated, very little resists the motion of the ship. Or if she lie in the middle of a river, she will without difficulty drive with the stream, because there is nothing to oppose her course. So the earth, though never so weighty, is as easily borne up by the celestial matter, which is 1,000 times more fluid than the water, and fills all that great space where the planets float. For how else would you have the earth fastened to resist the motion of the celestial matter, and not be driven by it? You may as well fancy a little block of wood can withstand the current of a river. But pray, says she, how can the earth with all its weight be borne up by your celestial matter, which must be very light because it is so fluid? It does not argue, says I, that what is most fluid is most light. For what think you of the great vessel I mentioned just now, which with all its burden is yet lighter than the water it floats on? I'll have nothing to do with that great vessel, says she, with some warmth, and I begin to apprehend myself in some danger upon such a whirligig as you have made of the earth. There is no danger, replied I. But, madam, if your fears increase, we'll have the earth supported by 4 elephants, as the Indians believe it. Heyday, cries she, here's another system. However, I love those people for taking care of themselves. They have a good foundation to trust to, while we Copernicans are a little too venturous with the celestial matter. And yet I fancy if the Indians thought the earth in the least danger of sinking, they would double their number of elephants. They do well, says I, laughing at her fancy. Who would sleep in fear? And if you have occasion for 'em tonight, we will put as many as you please in our system. We can take 'em away again by degrees as you grow better confirmed. I don't think 'em very necessary, says she. I have courage enough to turn. You shall turn with pleasure, madam, says I, and shall find delightful ideas in the system. For example, sometimes I fancy myself suspended in the air, without any motion, while the earth turns round me in 24 hours. I see I know not how many different faces pass under me, some white, some black, and some tawny. Sometimes I see hats, and sometimes turbans, now heads with hair, and then shaved pates. Here I see cities with steeples, some with spires and crescents, others with towers of porcelain, and anon great countries with nothing but huts. Here I see vast oceans, and there most horrible deserts. In short, I discover the infinite variety which is upon the surface of the earth. I confess, says she, 24 hours would thus be very well bestowed, so that in the place where we are now, I don't mean in the park, but we will suppose ourselves in the air, other people continually pass by who take up our place, and at the end of 24 hours we return to it again. Copernicus himself, says I, could not have comprehended it better. First then might we see the English passing by us, up to the ears in politics, yet settling the nation no better than we do the world in the moon. Then follows a great sea, and there perhaps some vessel, not near in that tranquillity as we are. Then comes some of the Iroquois, going to eat a prisoner for their breakfast, who seems as little concerned as his devourers. After appear the women of the land of Fefo, who spend all their time in dressing their husbands' dinners and suppers, and painting their lips and eyebrows blue, only to please the greatest brutes in the world. Then the Tartars going devoutly on pilgrimage to their great Prester John, who never comes out of a gloomy apartment all hung with lamps, by the light of which they pay their adoration to him. Then the fair Circassians, who make no scruples of granting everything to the first comer, except what they think essentially belongs to their husbands. Then the inhabitants of Little Tartary, going to steal concubines from the Turks and Persians, and at last our own dear countrymen, it may be in some points as ridiculous as the best of them. This, says the Countess, is very pleasant, but to imagine what you tell me, though I were above and saw all this, I would have the liberty to hasten or retard the motion of the earth, according as the objects please me more or less. And I assure you I should quickly send packing the politicians and man-eaters, but should have a great curiosity for the fair Circassians, for methinks they have a custom very particular. But I have a difficulty to clear, and you must be serious. As the earth moves, the air changes every moment, so we breathe the air of another country. Not at all, replied I, for the air which encompasses the earth does not extend above a certain height, perhaps 20 leagues. It follows us and turns with us. Have you not seen the work of a silkworm, the shells which those little animals imprison themselves in, and weave with so much art? They are made of a silk very close, but are covered with a down very loose and soft. So the earth, which is solid, is covered from the surface 20 leagues upwards with a kind of down, which is the air, and all the shell of the silkworms turns at the same time. Beyond the air is the celestial matter, incomparably more pure and subtle, and much more agitated than the air. Your comparison, says she, is somewhat mean, and yet what wonders are wrought, what wars, what changes in this little shell? 'Tis true, replied I, but nature takes no notice of such little particular motions, but drives us along with the general motion, as if she were at bowls. Methinks, says she, 'tis very ridiculous to be upon a thing that turns, and be in all this perplexity, and yet not be well assured that it does turn. And to tell you the truth, I begin to distrust the reasons you give, why we should not be sensible of the motion of the earth. For is it possible there should not be some little mark left, by which we might perceive it? All motions, says I, the more common and natural they are the less perceptible, and this holds true even in morality. The motion of self-love is so natural to us, that for the most part we are not sensible of it, and we believe we act by other principles. Now, says she, are you moralizing to a question of natural philosophy, which is running wide of the argument? But enough, this lecture is sufficient for the first time. Let us now go home, and meet here again tomorrow, you with your systems, and I with my ignorance. In returning back to the castle, that I might say all I could on the subject, I told her of a third system, invented by Tycho Brahe, who had fixed the earth in the center of the world, turned the sun round the earth, and the rest of the planets round the sun. For since the new discoveries, there was no way left to have the planets turn round the earth. But the Countess with the quickest apprehension replied, she thought this too affected a system, that among so many great bodies, the earth only should be exempted from turning round the sun, that it was improper to make the sun turn round the earth, when all the planets turn round the sun, and that though this scheme was to prove the immobility of the earth, yet she thought it very improbable. So we resolved to stick to Copernicus, whose opinion we thought most uniform, probable, and diverting. In a word, the simplicity of which convinces, and the boldness surprises with pleasure. End of Chapter 1, Part 2.